The Silenced Cathedral is the largest area of the game world in Soul Reaver, and remains so in the alpha, and throughout the level there are a number of interesting changes and alterations, culminating in a visit to the PINNACLE areas beyond Zephon. The first important aspect to note in relation to the cathedral is the change in the order of progression. In retail, Raziel heads to the necropolis, onto the pillars at the Sanctuary of the Clans, and then onto the cathedral. In the alpha, however, the order is changed, and Raziel heads to the cathedral straight from the necropolis. The implications for this are that the Reaver is not needed to enter the cathedral, and the Sanctuary of the Clans is breached by climbing rather than phasing. But that's a story for another episode. At the outer gate to the cathedral area, there is no grate yet, so the area can be freely accessed as soon as Raziel leaves the underworld. In the moat, there is another significant change, as there's no passage to the lighthouse. That area instead branches from the training room before the Sanctuary of the Clans. The door of the cathedral is also notably absent, but this is understandable, as it was a sealed door opened only by the Reaver. Instead, the grate behind forms the main barrier to entry. Inside the village area, there are some subtle changes to the houses, and there are no Zephonim, but a human hunter is present instead. A grate is positioned high up that changes the jumping around the area, which is removed in retail, and the climbing wall and health upgrade alcove are also missing. One notable absence is that the caves beneath the cathedral no longer contain the sound glyph altar. In the alpha, the altar is instead placed in a cave off the passage between the Sanctuary of the Clans and the Tomb of the Seraphim. The main chamber of the lower cathedral here features some notable differences, with a large human statue overlooking the room from a ledge, and large pipes bending in a completely different arrangement in spectral, almost making the jumping puzzle double-tiered. The side rooms are almost identical, but the mechanisms are activated by placing rocks on pressure pads. The spiral corridor area has an extra side room apparently intended for collectibles. In the side passages here is an interesting unique object. Appearing like a small blue cloud with golden sparkles, it's unclear what this item is intended to be, but it could be a prototype energy pickup or similar collectible. The item only appears here and is not seen in other builds or areas. glass at the top is not yet decorated with the bell design. The corridors to the side rooms are also a lot shorter, and pressure pads are used instead of the crank levers seen in retail. Another area apparently intended for a collectible can be found near the bottom block puzzle of the spiral corridor, hidden behind a destructible block. No health upgrade is given in the room with the block puzzle and pyramid-like structure, although the puzzle itself appears to function correctly. Moving up to the next level reveals one of the more striking changes. A corridor which bends only to the left in retail is revealed as a branching corridor in the alpha, with the same arrangement appearing in the betas. Both branches are identical and simply curve around the central fan area before meeting up again. In the pipe organ valve chambers, the openings have no lids, and instead rocks are positioned and rearranged to get the correct notes. What was not known, however, was the presence of a large constrictable object here, apparently made of stone at the branch of the corridor, along with a movable block decorated by stars behind it. The function of neither item is definitively known, but it seems likely that due to the constrict requirement, they would have been involved in puzzles to unblock the sounding pipes at the conclusion of the game. Several similarly functionless pipe puzzles exist, each potentially intended to be used in a return to the cathedral at the end of the game. At some point after this, the constrict puzzle objects were removed, and the May Beater was the last build to feature the branching corridor. The chambers along this path here have minor design changes, as do puzzle mechanisms. Perhaps the most obvious change here is the presence of the Sound Forge in a new side chamber off Cathy 42. In the upper chambers at the end of this section, much of the cocoons and webbing are different or incomplete, with mannequins on show at times. Zephon himself is interestingly rendered as a revived vampire in some builds, with the same sparkle effect and ability to drain health at a distance, although it's not treated to the same visual effect as later versions. He also has several previously unseen tube movements on his sides, and there are 4 dome-like structures on the ceiling, identical to the lens in Rahab's chamber in the Drowned Abbey. In the alphas, there are 2 side chambers, which curve back to reach high openings in the side walls. In later alpha builds, these corridors are blocked by a permeable barrier and need to be phased through. The corridors in these builds are shortened and no longer reach back to the main chamber. Organic soul spouts are also added. The same mechanic is present in beta versions, but both it and the corridors are removed from retail. There are also 4 dome-like structures on the ceiling, which are identical to the lens in Rahab's chamber in the Drowned Abbey. These may be placeholders for Zephon's legs. Ultimately, Zephon's boss battle is incomplete and not functional, but it seems to have the eggs and flamethrower mechanism seen in the retail version, in addition to the side soul chambers also seen in early beta versions. Although Zephon cannot be defeated, it is possible to activate his ability. This reveals that climbing was originally a much more versatile ability. It could still be used only on special climbing walls, whose textures are plainer than in retail. However, like the Zephonim, Raziel could climb in any direction when on them. Using this ability, Raziel will be able to return to the Sanctuary of the Clans and enter using a different route. The final surprise of the area is behind Zephon's head, where a passage can be seen leading upwards. The rooms connecting here vary between alpha builds, with various spiral passages, cloudy textured open pipe-like areas, and a fully textured ascending chamber, with many ledges to allow Raziel to climb up but ending in blank space, or on occasion, not connected at all. The intention of these passages appears to be to lead up to the pinnacle of the cathedral, known to be the last set piece of the game, where Raziel would open the cathedral's sounding pipes and use them to reactivate the cathedral for its intended purpose, to wipe out vampire life in Nosgoth, as is presented in the deleted audio. These areas present something of a conundrum. The presence of high-quality renders of the pinnacle suggested that the pinnacle scenes were perhaps meant as part of a Glyphex-style rendered cutscene, similar to the opening. However, the areas in the alpha suggest it could at one time have been intended to be shown as an in-game cutscene or even as a playable sequence. Just to confuse matters further is a third possible rendition of the pinnacle in the Chronoplast Visions. This apparently shows Raziel looking down from the pinnacle at the destruction he has caused while holding the amplified Reaver, a scene which Soul Reaver 2 later copied at Janos' retreat in an effort to reintegrate into the series canon. The vision scene can be visited in the beta movie rooms, and these show it is little more than a single corridor with an outer facade. The alphas further highlight this disconnection, as none of them feature the area, suggesting that, like the vision of Ariel, it may have been something of a mock-up, apparently created using the textures of Tyrell's clan territory.